You didn't imagine it would be like this. You heard about promises, straight paths, rewards. You surrendered with sincerity, but found a silence that screams. You expected to be lifted up, but everything around you fell apart. You wanted answers, but only nights came where not even the pillow understood the weight of what you held inside. And when you tried to explain, the words failed. Because how do you say that your soul feels something that even you don't understand? How do you describe the mixture of faith and exhaustion? You believed, but now you're here, tired of waiting, confused by the signs, and distrustful of your own heart. Don't be fooled into thinking God has forgotten you. What you're experiencing now isn't the end. It's the beginning of what's real. The one who wants to lift someone up first undoes everything that person built with their own hands. And it's not because he's cruel, it's because he's just. Because he knows how much we trust in things that seem firm, but are like sand, and sand can't support eternal weight. Watchman Nee said firmly that before God uses someone in a significant way, he breaks them deeply. Not as punishment, but as a process. What hurts now is what will strengthen you later. You look back and see moments when everything seemed right. You served, you prayed, you loved, and yet doors closed, people walked away, promises seemed to have expired. And that hurt you, because deep down you thought you were doing everything right. But what is right when your heart is still full of justifications, still seeks control, still wants invisible applause? When God wants to form eternal character in you, he doesn't tolerate what only sounds spiritual. He touches what is hidden. The hidden motivation, the silent intention, and then you feel like you've been torn away from everything. And you have. Because where he wants to take you, there's no room for anything but him. You might think you're being punished, that you're being forgotten, but the forgetfulness you feel is where he begins to work. Joseph was thrown into a pit. Moses was hidden in the desert. David was persecuted for years. None of them knew that this process was generating something eternal. They just survived each day, trusting in something greater than their own eyes. And you also survive. Every night you wake up with a heavy heart, every silence that consumes you, every time you swallow your tears to appear strong. But God isn't impressed with your apparent strength. He's looking at your exposed weakness. He's treating the roots, those that you yourself can't reach. The pain you feel today isn't punishment, it's refinement. It's not the end of the promise. It's the deconstruction of everything that prevented the promise from reaching you. You need to stop expecting immediate glory and start seeing eternity. It's not about visible victories, but about invisible transformation, because that's where everything changes. When you stop looking for solutions and start surrendering, when you accept that you have no control, when you look inside and realize that the greatest enemy wasn't the other person, it was pride disguised as zeal. It was vanity hidden in your good intentions. It was insecurity disguised as faith. Watchman Nee always warned that what prevents us from seeing God clearly isn't scandalous sin, but the life of the soul. That part that wants to understand, justify, rationalize. The soul needs to be broken, and that happens in silence, in waiting, in solitude. That's where he whispers, but you only hear if you're willing to no longer cling to the old structure. You want to be used, you want to be lifted up, but you still cling to crumbs of control. You haven't realized it, but true surrender isn't saying yes, it's letting go. It's accepting that even what you considered good can be an obstacle when it becomes a silent idol. Maybe you've been faithful, and yet you've been forgotten. Maybe you've prayed for years, and everything has gotten worse. Maybe you've waited for a word, and it never came. That's not God's failure. That's where he digs deeper, when you stop listening to external echoes and start facing what you really are. He wants to take Egypt out of you. He wants the desert not only to teach you, but to reveal you. It's not about surviving the process. It's about being transformed by it. As long as you try to defend yourself, he won't act. As long as you argue, justify, analyze, nothing changes. God doesn't negotiate with the soul. He waits for the moment when everything collapses. When you look around and say, I have nothing left. That's where he begins. Because only nothing can receive everything. Only emptiness can contain fullness. And there's no use trying to pretend anymore. He knows the looks you pretend not to have given, the words you wanted to say but swallowed, the thoughts you reject but that visit you in the early hours. He saw your strength trying to survive a war that was his, and now he's disarming you. You need to stop fighting for an image of strength. You need to accept that you're fragile, that you're lost, that you're afraid, because only in that place can he be your sustenance. It's no longer about promises, it's about presence. God doesn't want to give you something, he wants to be everything. Watchman Nee said that many want the crown, but can't bear the cross. And the cross isn't a symbol, it's a cut between what you want and what he wants, between what you feel and what he commands. And yes, it hurts. It hurts because you're going to lose yourself, but that's where you find true life. Don't expect others to understand. They won't. They'll see your struggle, but they won't understand the process. They'll see your silence, but they won't hear what God tells you in the dark hours. They'll see your tired eyes, but they won't realize what's being generated inside. Because what God does in you isn't for display, it's for edification. You were called to something greater. But before you live the calling, everything that still resists must die. It's not time to ask for explanations. It's time to accept that God's silence is deeper than the noise of the world. That what he's doing now, even if it seems like loss, is eternal construction. You may not see it, but he's molding you, and when everything is broken, he will come. Not as relief, but as foundation. Because now you no longer rely on yourself. Now finally, he can be everything in you. Write in the comments, God is good all the time, if you recognize that his love is constant and eternal. You think you're alone, that this emptiness that accompanies you in silence is a sign of abandonment. But this emptiness, this lack of ground, isn't what it seems. What you feel as loss is in fact space being created, space where God is removing noises, distractions, certainties that were never secure. You haven't been left aside, you've been separated. That's different. Separated for something that can't be built in a hurry, nor maintained by human strength. Watchman Nee repeated that God never entrusts great burdens to those who still cling to their own ability. And that's the root of what holds you back. You still want to understand everything. You still think that if you understand the reason for the pain, you'll bear it better. But God doesn't reveal the whole purpose to those who still need justifications. You want answers, but he offers you presence. You want control, but he gives you dependence. You want to see the end, but he teaches you to walk without knowing the next step. Not to test you, but to make you someone who lives by faith and not by sight. What you don't realize is that this darkness, this time when everything seems stagnant, is where the root of your faith is growing. It grows downwards before it grows upwards. It grows in silence, while you think you're dying, but it's there, in the darkness that no one applauds, that your true structure begins to form. The people around you may be living accelerated cycles. They show visible fruits, and that confuses you. You wonder why you're still in the same place, why your steps seem slower, why your wait is so long. But you're not seeing what God is doing. He's not worried about applause, recognition, visibility. He's forming something eternal, and that doesn't happen under the spotlight. Watchman Nee said that what is truly spiritual can only be born in the spirit, and everything that is born in the flesh, even if it seems right, carries death with it. You've been struggling not to sink. You've been making an effort to keep your eyes open. But it's not your strength that God is looking for. He waits for your exhaustion, the point where you stop struggling and just sink into him. Because the surface you lived on no longer serves. It was comfortable but shallow, and he called you to deep waters, where there is no support, where control dissolves, where either you surrender or you sink. And it's in that place that he wants to find you. Not to condemn you, but to rebuild you. Reconstruction doesn't begin with new pieces. It begins with the acceptance of the rubble. And you still resist admitting that you're broken. You need to stop being afraid of your pain. It's not your enemy, it's the door. The narrow door where everything superfluous falls, where the ego loses strength, where the masks fall one by one, where artificial spirituality is undone, where what's left is what really is. And it's at that moment that you approach God in a way you never imagined, because he doesn't visit you when you're whole. He dwells with you in the breaking, when you're too tired to pretend, when you stop praying beautifully and just start crying, when you no longer have the strength to convince anyone of anything. That's where he reveals himself. The pain you feel isn't a mistake in the journey, it's a divine process. And processes don't accelerate with screams, nor with despair. You need to remain, stay in the place where it hurts without running away. Remain, even when nothing changes on the outside, even when you don't understand, even when your prayers have no visible return. Remain, because that's where faith stops being theory and becomes substance, and there is no other way. There is no shortcut for those who have been called to be deep. God isn't interested in impressing you. He wants to transform you. And transformation costs everything you still want to preserve. Your eyes still seek approval. They still look for recognition in the gestures of others. They still expect a sign, a word, a human touch. But God wants to close that door. Because as long as you depend on any other source of comfort, he won't be your everything. He is jealous of those he loves. He doesn't share space with the remnants of your certainties. That's why he has allowed this silence. Because he knows that if his voice mixes with others, you won't discern him. So he silences everything, so that you learn to hear not with your ears, but with your spirit. What you call delay is preparation. What you feel as deviation is alignment, and what seems like irreparable loss, God is using as fertile ground. You think you're delayed, but you're being planted, and no plant grows before it dies. The seed needs to rot first, lose its original shape, be crushed by the earth, be ignored, be forgotten, and only then does the invisible begin, what no one sees, what you yourself don't realize. But God continues to work, in secret, in the hidden, in the deep. You may think you've waited too long, that what they promised you will never come, that it was all an illusion, but God doesn't commit to what is fast. He is faithful to what is eternal. And his promise isn't in a hurry, because what comes from God can't be delivered at any time. It needs the right time. And the right time is when you're no longer who wanted to receive, but someone who can sustain what will come. That's why he holds you back. That's why he silences you. That's why he takes you back to the same lesson, to the same unanswered questions. Because as long as something in you still seeks escape, still resists, still argues, he waits. Watchman Nee affirmed that the work of God can only be done by those who have lost all love for themselves. And that is painful. Losing love for one's own opinions, for one's own reasons, for one's own rights. But you need to understand, brokenness is not a phase, it's a position, it's not an event. It's a state where you no longer rely on anything that comes from yourself, and that takes time. It takes sleepless nights, it takes silences that bother you, it takes losses that don't make sense, but it's necessary. Because what God wants to do with you doesn't fit into fragile structures. He wants to build something that doesn't shake, something that remains even when everything fails. And you are being invited to this, to die, to renounce, to accept the process that no one sees, but that changes everything. And yes, you will cry, you will feel alone, you will doubt. There will be days when you will want to give up, but on those days, remember, God's silence is a space where he digs deeper, where he prepares you for a level you don't yet understand. He doesn't just want to use you, he wants to possess you. And for that, nothing can occupy his place. You can continue trying to solve with your hands what only the Spirit understands. You can continue seeking emotional shortcuts, trying to numb yourself with empty words, but nothing will fill you, nothing will change. Because his work is perfect and cannot be accelerated, you need to choose. Continue living in superficial cycles or allow him to complete the work, even if it costs you everything. The time of preparation is where most give up, because it hurts, because it's tiring, because it demands more than we imagine. But if you stay, if you endure the silence, if you continue even without answers, something inside you will change. You will no longer be guided by emotions. You will no longer depend on circumstances. You will begin to live by faith, not faith as a concept, but faith as ground, as breathing, as the only certainty in the midst of darkness. And it is in this place that God finds you, not to reward you, but to possess you completely, because you were separated for something greater, and now he is molding you, not for today, but for eternity. Write in the comments, "God is my Father." If you feel his care and love for you, you still think that God will lift you up as you lift up a fallen chair. But he is not concerned with repositioning you in the same landscape as before. What he is doing is tearing up the scenery, undoing the story you told yourself. He is not just waiting for you to get up, he is waiting for you to empty yourself. And that is deeper than it seems. Empty yourself of opinions, of plans made by the strength of your arm, of demands that you barely realize you carry in your heart. What you feel as injustice might just be persistence. You're still insisting on driving the narrative. You want him to bless the construction you started yourself, but he's dismantling everything. Not to shame you, but to save you from a false, fragile, and convenient faith. A faith that only survives when it's fed. A faith that depends on external confirmations. A faith that dies in silence. He wants to give you something real, but the real thing doesn't fit in hearts that still crave the applause of the world. You need to stop asking God to give you what would still destroy you. If he delivered it now, you couldn't handle it. What you think is a delay is deliverance. It's mercy. Because what is his requires internal structure, and structure isn't built overnight. It's in the dark, in secret. While you pray and it seems like nothing answers, he's there, excavating. And it hurts, because he doesn't excavate the surface. He goes to where you've hidden your oldest fears, the traumas you've learned to live with. He touches places you yourself have forgotten. You look at life and feel like it's slipped through your fingers. You wonder if you did everything wrong. And maybe, yes, a lot was done out of time, out of dependence. But God doesn't deal with you like a bitter judge. He is the potter, and when he finds cracks, he doesn't discard. He starts over. He destroys the vessel, yes, but to remake it. And remaking is slower than creating from scratch, because you already come marked, already wounded. And he touches those wounds. Not to expose you, but to truly heal you, without makeup, without a facade. How many times have you silenced yourself to avoid being misunderstood? How many times have you smiled to avoid bothering anyone? You've been silencing pains, desires, hopes, until you reached a point where you yourself didn't know what you felt anymore. And now, in this place where everything seems still, it's as if these internal voices are starting to scream. You try to silence them, try to occupy yourself, try to maintain the routine. But God doesn't want you to run away. He wants you to listen, to face it, because while you distract yourself, you don't heal. Watchman Nee said that the greatest obstacle to the spiritual life is the unbroken soul, because the soul wants to control, wants to know, wants to justify. But God doesn't reveal himself to the mind. He reveals himself to the spirit. And only what passes through the cross enters the spirit. The cross is where the soul is silent, where arguments die, where pride bows, where the I ceases to be the center, And you know that you still live a lot from your eye. You still seek comfort, for predictability, for emotional security. But there is no stability on the cross. There is surrender. There is an end. And that's what he wants from you. An end, not of you as a person, but of your internal reign, of your attempt to manage everything, to control even suffering. He wants you to stop negotiating with pain, to stop masking your expectations, to stop pushing the soul under the rug. He wants the truth, your truth, the one that only appears when you're at your limit, when you're tired of being strong, when you no longer have an image to maintain, when the crying escapes even without you wanting it, when you admit that you no longer know how to continue. And then something starts to happen, not on the outside. Inside, you start to stop looking for signs and start to desire presence. You no longer want explanations, you just want to know that he is still there. And he is. He always has been. But now you can perceive it, because the pain opened your eyes, the loneliness loosened the ties with what was false, and finally you can see that God never took you out of the process. He kept you in it. Because it is there that the essence is born. You won't come out of this being the same, nor should you, because everything you were before didn't sustain what God wants to do, and he knows it. That's why he doesn't let you move forward while you still cling to the old version of yourself. You're trying to bring an old mentality to a new season, and that doesn't work. New wine requires new wineskins, and you still try to contain the new with the old structure. But it will burst, it will break, because what is of God doesn't fit where the ego still governs. Have you ever wondered why certain relationships ended? Why some connections cooled down? Why you lost space in places where you were once celebrated? It wasn't by chance. It was pruning. It was God cutting off branches that no longer bore fruit. It was him separating you from what fed the old self. They weren't losses. They were deliverance. Even if they hurt like stabs, even if they made you feel discarded, he was protecting what is being formed in you. Because certain companies, certain environments undermine what is spiritual, and God is too zealous to allow that. You don't need to understand everything, but you need to trust. Trust even when it doesn't make sense, even when it hurts too much, even when everything in you wants to give up. It is at this moment that faith is proven, when you choose to remain even without ground, when you refuse to back down, even without strength, when you decide not to retreat, even if your soul is screaming. It is in this place that glory is formed. Not the glory of the stage, the glory of transformed character, of the surrendered heart, of the life that no longer seeks fame but desires depth. Watchman Nee said that there is a difference between doing the work of God and living the life of God, and you are being called to that life, not to religious activism but to real intimacy, to walk with God without filters, to be transformed, not applauded. And that will cost. It will cost control, image, plans, but it will be worth it. Because nothing in the world compares to the rest of being who God wants you to be. Free from expectations, free from pressure, free from the need for approval, free. You were made to live in freedom. But real freedom only comes after the cross, after death, after surrender. Not partial surrender, but total, without. Write in the comments, I wait on God. If you trust that his timing is perfect, maintaining appearances, you've already understood that you can no longer bear the weight of being who others want you to be. And more than that, you've begun to realize that even you didn't really know who you were. You learned to respond with ready-made phrases, to say that everything is fine, to keep smiling even when inside the soul cried for help. You got good at it. At hiding, at functioning, at fulfilling expectations, but God never asked you to function. He called you to live. And living, as Watchman Nee repeated, is not repeating religious gestures with human effort. Living is allowing Christ to live in you, and that only happens when you die to everything you still try to keep standing on your own. You may have gotten used to the idea of being strong. Perhaps this was the only way to survive. Be strong so as not to bother, strong so as not to worry, strong because no one ever seemed ready to deal with your weakness. And now, when everything has collapsed inside, you feel ashamed even of your pain. But God is not impressed with your strength. He never asked for it. He never demanded that you endure the unbearable alone. This strength that you wear as armor, He wants to take away, not to expose you, but to free you. Because the true strength that sustains the sky does not come from rigidity. It comes from surrender. Surrender is who no longer has arguments, who has stopped trying to deserve. Surrender is who has accepted that they no longer know how to pray as before, but continue there, present, even if in silence. Surrender is who has lost everything, but still does not go back. Surrender is who, even without seeing a sign, chooses to stay. It is in this type of surrender that the glory of God rests. Because where there is too much noise, He moves away. But where there is silence of surrender, He makes a home. You may be in the darkest moment of your journey. You may have lost your way, your hope, your encouragement. You may have nights when the pillow is your only confidant. But in that same dark place, He is. And if you are quiet enough, you will realize it. His presence does not depend on your emotional state. It does not depend on your good spiritual performance. It is. Because He is. He did not come to you because you did everything right. He came because you are His, and whoever is His, even when lost, remains marked. Maybe you're still trying to rebuild the pieces, but the question is, it's not the old pieces that God wants to use. He won't put you together like an old puzzle. He will make everything new. But the new requires detachment. It requires you to no longer try to fit the present with the past. It requires you to accept that certain things have ended, and that this end was not failure, it was liberation. You may be crying because something died, but God is smiling because now He can start. Really start, without crutches, without illusions, without the fragile faith that depended on emotional return. Do you realize how your heart still clings? You want to trust in God, but you still want to control the rhythm. You still want to know what comes next, and He won't tell you. Because He doesn't want to please you, He wants to transform you. And transformation only happens when you walk without seeing, without knowing, without understanding, but with the Spirit still in reverence. It is not a passive walk. It is active. Because following, even without strength, requires faith. And this faith that you are learning now has no external beauty. It is raw, rough, silent, but it is real. How many times have you been hurt trying to do good? How many times have your intentions been misinterpreted? You tried to love and were rejected. You tried to serve and were forgotten. You tried to remain faithful and were devalued. And this generated wounds so deep that you started to protect yourself from everything, even from God, not with words, but with internal reservations. As if, unconsciously, you said to Him, I trust, but not completely. I believe, but I need guarantees. But God doesn't enter into agreements like that. He wants everything, or He doesn't enter, and that sounds harsh, but it is liberating. Because His love does not negotiate with your emotional protection. He invades, He disarms, He exposes to heal. You want Him to speak, but He is already speaking, in silence, in the delay, in the apparent abandonment. Heaven is not silent. He just stopped speaking with words because He no longer wants to convince you. He wants to transform you, and transformation happens when you stop resisting. When you let go of the whys, when you accept that certain pains have no human explanation but have an eternal purpose. The cross was not explained to the disciples at that moment, only later, and you are exactly there, at the moment when everything seems absurd, confusing, unbearable, but that doesn't define the end, that only marks the middle, and God always reveals Himself in the middle, not in the beginning. The desert you live in is not punishment. It is a path, it is passage, it is preparation. Because the promise requires a version of you that is not yet ready. And it won't be while you insist on taking old spiritual habits into a new time. You have already realized that automatic prayers no longer work, that memorized verses no longer console, that the praises that once moved you now seem empty. This is a sign that God is calling you to another level. A level where emotion does not sustain faith, where only the Spirit lives, where nothing but the living Word matters. And in this place, there are no crowds, there are no ready-made tips, there are no instant answers. It's you and God. And this encounter, as lonely as it seems, is what heals you. It's what aligns you. It's what strengthens you. Because when you stop listening to all the other voices, you can finally discern the only one that matters. And it doesn't come with noise. It comes with authority, with peace, with truth. Watchman Nee said that God is not interested in your ability to do things for him. He wants you, simple as that. But this you needs to be real, needs to be whole. And to be whole, it first needs to be broken. Because you still live fragmented between what you feel, what you say, and what you believe. And God is gathering the pieces, not to patch up, but to redo. You may be about to give up. You may be exhausted. But even so, something in you still resists leaving. That something is the Spirit, and He won't leave you. Because even without strength, you were marked by God. And a spiritual mark cannot be erased. You no longer belong to the emotional system of the world. You were separated, and whoever is separated no longer fits in any place. That's why it hurts. That's why it's tiring. That's why it seems like there is no longer a place where you feel completely welcomed. Because now, the only place where you really rest is in Him. And no, this is not punishment. It is privilege. It is a sign that He is near, that He is already shaping the next time. Only for that, you need to continue. Even without encouragement, even without understanding, just continue, because what is being generated in you now, even in tears, will bear fruit. And it won't be just any fruit. It will be eternal. It will be indestructible. It will be an answer for others who will still go through the same path. You were not forgotten. You were hidden. And there is a purpose in that. Write in the comments, God is faithful if you have already seen His promises fulfilled in your life. You were hidden, yes, not as someone who is abandoned, but as someone who is protected. As someone who is separated for something that the eyes cannot yet understand. And this hiding place, which seemed like prison to you, was shelter. It was the only place where you could descend so much that you could find what is not lost, even in the midst of losses. Because God doesn't take you to the bottom to drown you. He takes you to the bottom to found you. To give you roots that are not uprooted by the wind, that are not burned by waiting, that are not broken by rejection. And even though you didn't ask for this process, it came. You didn't want to go through this silence, but it reached you. And the strangest thing is that the more you tried to resist, the more His presence was revealed through other paths. You discovered that God does not depend on your words to act, nor on your effort to continue. When you were on the ground, unable to open your mouth, He didn't charge you. He stayed. And that's why you're still here. Not by merit, not by performance, but because He didn't give up on you at the moment when you gave up on everything. Have you noticed how your eyes have changed? How your way of seeing the world is no longer the same? People who used to hurt you no longer have the same power today. Situations that used to unbalance you now silence you in a different way. The pain still exists, but now it produces more reverence than despair. And that's a sign that something has changed, not outside, inside. The cross has passed through you, and you have survived. But you didn't survive as you were. You survived as new, different, lighter. Not because the burden has decreased, but because now who carries with you is another. It is He. You might not even realize it, but your voice is steadier now. Not louder, but steadier. There's less anxiety in your tone, less haste in your gestures. You're beginning to inhabit eternity. Still with fear, yes. Still with doubt. But with a faith that has learned to walk even when everything is blurred. And that's where you find yourself. In the place where faith matures. Where you stop trying to understand the process and start embracing what the process produces. Watchman Nee said that God only entrusts the weight of glory to shoulders that have already borne the weight of the cross. And you carried it, you bled, you thought about stopping, but every step on that dark path solidified something within you that can no longer be taken away. It's as if now, even without having answers, you know that there is no other way besides this one. Not because you've gotten used to the pain, but because you've discovered who walks with you in it. And that's enough. You still miss things you've lost. People, places, versions of yourself that stayed in the past. But God is teaching you to live with longing without being bound by it. He's showing you that there is beauty in letting go. That there is life where there seemed to be an end. And above all, that what is coming doesn't depend on what was left behind. Because His new doesn't build on ruins, but on redemption. And redemption is this, taking what you thought was waste and turning it into a foundation. And now you are not the same anymore, but you still don't feel ready for what's to come. You no longer believe in promises as before, but you also can't doubt completely, and it is exactly there that heaven draws near. Not when you are safe. But when you accept walking even without knowing where you're stepping, when you follow even with empty hands, when you give up trying to understand in order to just obey. It's at this point that the invisible becomes more real than everything you can touch. You don't need to prove anything anymore, and deep down you know it. You just needed a place where you could admit your exhaustion. Where you could say with honesty that you're tired of trying to meet expectations that God never placed on you. You were taught to be strong, but now you're learning to be dependent. And that dependence is the safest place you could be, because it takes you away from pride, it frees you from comparison, it empties you of haste, and it connects you to the rhythm of heaven. Watchman Nee was always incisive when talking about the difference between working for God and living with God. And maybe you've lived so long trying to do for Him that you forgot to be with Him. But now you can no longer sustain spiritual activism. The repetitions have lost their meaning, the scenery collapsed. The desire to serve was confused with the desire to be seen, and that made you stop. But stopping in this case was grace, because you only truly hear when the noise ceases. You are, for the first time, making space for Him to not only speak, but to occupy. Not with ideas, with presence, and that changes everything. Because when He occupies, what was important loses strength. What used to keep you awake at night no longer has the same weight. And even with a tired body, even with a heart still recovering, there is something inside you that knows. There's no going back. You no longer fit in the places of before, in the thoughts of before, in the relationships of before. Because when God passes by, He doesn't just mark, He transforms the landscape. You will still miss what was. You will doubt the journey. There will be days when you will want to go back. But now there is something stronger than your will. There is a fire that doesn't go out, even on stormy days. It's the Spirit. He remains even when you falter. He sustains even when you drag yourself. Because the promise is not upon you, it is within you, and a promise that is born of the Spirit does not die with time, nor with pain. It remains. You may not be able to say exactly what is happening. You may not have words, but your soul knows. The Spirit within you recognizes you are being called, not to a new mission, to a new life, not of visibility, of depth, where no one needs to see as long as He is there, where the title, the function, the recognition no longer matter as long as He remains. You may still think that you need to fix yourself before taking the next step. But God never asked for your perfection. He only asked for your surrender. And you are already surrendered. Even in pieces you are. Even full of questions. Even without certainties. And that's enough, because He doesn't act with those who understand everything, but with those who surrender even without understanding. The faith that moves mountains is the same that kneels in silence before them. And now you are being lifted up, not as someone who returns to the stage, but as someone who has finally found the firm ground of presence. You no longer need the structures that once sustained your spirituality. God is being your sustenance, and what He begins, He finishes. His work is not interrupted by your weaknesses, it is built on them. It is there, exactly there, where you collapsed, that He laid the first brick of the new time. You may not see everything now, but a day will come when you will look back and you will understand. You will realize that the days of crying were seeds, that the silence was fertilizer, that the loneliness was discipline, and that what seemed like destruction was, in fact, foundation. You will look and you will see that everything had a purpose, that no suffering was in vain, that every tear told something to heaven, and that what God promised was not forgotten. There is nothing more to fear. There is nothing more to hide. What you went through no longer defines you. What you lost no longer limits you. What you lived no longer imprisons you. Now it's just you and Him, in the deepest, in the truest, in the most transformative. And from here on, you will no longer be carried by winds. You will be guided by direction. You will no longer walk by sight. You will walk by faith. You will no longer live by what you feel. You will live by what you believe. And what you believe now is no longer fragile. It's conviction, because it was God who generated it. You are not alone. You have been reached, and what began in secret will bear fruit in the sight of all. But now, unlike before, that no longer matters to you, because what you really wanted, you already have. Presence, truth, eternal, and no one can take that away. Not time, not the world, not even yourself. Because what God seals remains. And what He transforms never returns to what it was. Stay, remain, believe, because everything that was ground in pain will be raised in glory, not the glory of man, the glory of heaven. And when it comes, you will know, because now, finally, you have been made whole. Inside, where no one sees, where everything begins, where God dwells, where you should have always been. Write in the comments, God, I adore you. If your heart's desire is to praise and magnify His name, share this blessed video so that it can touch and help other people like you and me. Want to delve even deeper into faith and prayer? Download our exclusive ebook on how to strengthen your spirituality today. The link is in the comments below. Don't forget to click the subscribe button if you haven't already. Thank you very much from the bottom of my heart for being part of our faith community. If you would like to support our channel a little more, consider becoming a member of our channel. I leave here 2 more videos so that you can continue your spiritual search and growth in faith. Thank you, and may God bless everyone. See you later.